What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be getting back to work on the new engine for our super cheap turbo Civic build. Now, just in case you guys haven't been following along, this is a D16 Y8 that we found on Facebook Marketplace for $150. Once we got this thing home and started tearing it apart, we quickly found out that it had a broken rod and a completely wiped crankshaft. So while we were on the hunt for a Z6 crankshaft, we decided to start working on the cylinder head. So while we had it out, we decided to clean that thing up. I hand ported it myself, threw a comp cam and some Crowder valve springs in it, and that thing has been sitting on the bench just ready to go for this new engine for a little while now. But you can go back on the Honda playlist and check all those videos out if that's something that interests you. So once we got the cylinder head all done and we were able to find a nice fresh Z6 crankshaft, we started to work on the engine block itself. Now, as you guys can see, we got this thing pretty cleaned up. We hit it with a fresh coat of paint. I have already notched the block for our new Eagle rods and Vitara piston combo, and we decided to throw some epoxy in the water jackets around the cylinders to give this thing the best chance at holding all of the boost as possible. So there's only a couple things left for us to do before we can start reassembly of this engine. I want to go through, hone each cylinder, and we also need to set our piston ring gap. So those are two things that we're going to get done pretty quick here early on in the video, and then we can finally go ahead and get this thing reassembled. So let's get through the intro and get to work. Now that we've gotten through the intro, the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and get this thing honed. As you guys can see, I made a little plastic shield there. I seen it on TikTok or something. Didn't seem to work out too well for me here. But we went ahead and got each cylinder honed real quick using a 240 grit ball hone from Brush Research. I'll throw a link in the description below. But we're going to go ahead and get this thing honed out, and then we can move on to filing some rings. The next thing that I want to work on is getting our pistons onto our rods. Now, we're using the Eagle rods and the Vitara pistons. If I'm able to, I will link these in the description below for you guys. Now, I did already assemble two, and we ran into a weird little issue. Now, when we would put these on with the wrist pins perfectly centered, they were smooth as could be, and they felt perfectly fine. But if I slid this over to one side or the other, the top of the rod was actually contacting the bottom of the piston, only on that little seam on that center hump there. So we went ahead and filed that down a little bit, and they were perfectly fine. Now, the rod is going to stay centered of that piston and wrist pin 99.9% of the time if everything is going to plan, but it was bothering me, so I went ahead and cleaned that up, and now they ride extremely smooth, no issues side to side. So I'm going to go ahead, get our last two pistons cleaned up, and then we will start assembling these two so that we can set them to the side and they will be ready for final assembly. I like to get the rod end caps loose before we put a piston on here, so I've got it in the vise wrapped up in a rag to keep it protected, and we're just going to break these loose. As you can see, Eagle sends them extremely tight. We're going to break these loose and then get this apart, and we'll clean it all up. So I like to back these out a little bit. Sure, there's a different way of doing this, but then I take and I grab it firmly here on the cap. I take a soft hammer like this one without whacking your fingers, and I tap it so that we can get them apart because they have alignment dowels in there. Now we can take this over to the bench, take it the rest of the way apart, clean out all these threads, clean the bolts, clean everything up, and then we can start working with it. Not sure if you guys can see it, but there's all kinds of crap in these threads from when they machine them. I'm honestly surprised they don't clean them a little better, but there's crap in there. And then if we look at the bolts, they're even worse. They've got crud all over them. Looks like little fine like metal shavings or some sort of cutting oil from cutting the threads. So we're going to go ahead and clean all this up, and then we can start assembling it. So I went ahead and cleaned everything up. We cleaned our piston, our rod, our bolts, our wrist pin, our snap rings, everything. I clean everything up. So now that we've got that stuff all cleaned up, we are finally ready to assemble this piston and rod. Now, the way that we're going to be assembling them for our engine is there are some tangs or notches here for the bearing, those are going to go towards the exhaust side of the engine, and that side just happens to have the stamping number. So I'm going to refer to this side as the number side. So we've got that. And then on our piston, we've got an arrow that's going to be facing the flywheel. Now, you could do it the other way. A lot of people do with these pistons, but I'm going to be doing it arrow to the flywheel because the bigger of the valve reliefs is going to go to our intake side. This would be exhaust side. This would be the intake side. So we're going to do arrow towards the flywheel. Now, an easy way for me to remember this while I've been assembling these on the bench is that if I take the number side, face it towards me, I can put the arrow to my left, and we are good to go, because then when we turn this around, the arrow faces the flywheel, the numbers face the exhaust. So we're going to go ahead and get this one assembled. I'll get the pin oiled up and slid in there, and we will be good to go to put our snap rings in. So for this whole assembly, I've decided to use this VP Racing engine assembly lube. Just what I chose to use. I've used Lucas, all kinds of different stuff. Some people use like transmission fluid or whatever. This is just what I like to use. So that's what we're going to oil our piston wrist pin up with. So I'm going to go ahead and put some oil on this guy. Just like so. Go ahead and spread it around with my finger. I'm going to get our wrist pin installed into our piston here. Just like so. I'm going to throw a little bit of oil in the small end of the rod as well. You can line this up carefully. And now we can go ahead and put our snap rings in. I'm going to get this down close to where it needs to be. And then I'm just going to try to get at least part of it down in there. Alright, we've got that super close. Now I can just go ahead and push it the rest of the way in. Just like so. Now we can flip it over and do our last one. Alright, this one is together, guys. Now we can do our final one, and these things are ready for assembly. Now that we've got our new pistons and rods assembled, we can start gapping some piston rings. So I just called up Speed Factory, told them what we were doing, and they went ahead and sent these out to us. So if we go ahead and open these things up, you guys can see in here that they are already packaged in the orientation that they're gonna go. So we've got our top ring, our middle ring, and then our lowest, which is the oil control ring. So we're gonna take these out. Each cylinder is gonna have a set. So we're gonna designate cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we will keep those for that cylinder. And then we can start setting them in each cylinder and starting to gap them. So let's go ahead and get these opened up. We'll get them split out, and then we can start setting our gaps. Now, like I said, in our case, the thickest ring is actually the middle ring, and then the medium thickness ring is our top ring. So we're going to be doing this just numbering it 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we've got our number 1 top ring in here right now. As you can see, I've just got it set down in there, and we're using an old piston that I just cleaned up a little bit to go ahead and square that ring off for us. And now we can take our feeler gauges. We're going to be measuring our top ring at 22 thousandths, our middle ring at 24 thousandths, and then our oil ring, we're just going to check and make sure that it has at least 15 thousandths of clearance. So we'll go ahead, check this with a feeler gauge, and then we can start taking some material off slowly till we get it where we want it. So as you guys can see, the 22 does not quite fit in there. So we're going to go ahead, pop this ring out, hit it with the grinder a couple times, and then we can check it again. So as you guys can see, we've got my little backwoods ring filer set up here. We've got our die grinder and a little vise. I'm just gonna have Dylan hold the trigger, and we're gonna hold this ring just like this. We want to take the material off of one side so that the other side stays true, and we're just gonna very, very gently run it into that wheel a couple times, and then we'll go check it. I'm gonna count how many touches it takes so that we can try to speed up the process for the following rings. But all right, let's go ahead and give this a shot. So we've got it to where 22 feels good. I'm happy with that. So what we're gonna do now is take this ring back out, and then we're just gonna make sure we get any burr off of the side of the ring. I'll show you here in just a second. So we're just gonna take our little file here, We're just gonna take it so that we don't feel that burr anymore. So once we get that done, it's a little bit time consuming, especially on the first one, because it takes you a little while to figure out how much you're gonna have to take off. But once you do, the next one should go a little bit quicker. So we're gonna repeat that same process for the top and middle ring on each 4 cylinders. So I'm not gonna bore you guys with that. We're just gonna jam through and get those done, so that we're one step closer to assembling this engine. Now that we've got all of the piston rings gapped, we're gonna go ahead and grab our new crankshaft. We decided to go with a Z6 crankshaft. Found this one on Facebook Marketplace. Someone had brought it to a machine shop, so this thing is nice and fresh. So we've got it boxed up right here. We're gonna go ahead and open it up. We'll clean it off if we need to, and then get ready to set it down in our block so that we can check our bearing clearances. As you guys can see, the journals on this one are nice and fresh. So we're just gonna go ahead and clean them off with any oil they put on to keep it from rusting. And then we'll be just about ready to set this down in our block. So we went ahead and got our new crankshaft all cleaned up. And now we're gonna start prepping our bearings. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna use some brake clean on them. We're using the ACL race style bearings. The part number for both the main and the rods are right there. And then we're also using the ACL thrust washers, which we have the part number right there. So we're gonna go ahead and just hit the back and front of each bearing with some brake clean. These do have a coating on them, so don't be nervous if they look a little funky like ours do. So we're gonna hit them with some brake clean, get them all cleaned up, and then we can go over to the engine and start setting these things in. Now that we've got our bearings clean, I'm gonna go ahead and start laying them into the block, and we'll do the same thing on the girdle. I'm gonna use a little bit of ATF on the block and girdle side of the bearings. I like to use something a little bit thinner than oil on the back side, so that when we go to bolt everything up, the ATF will actually be able to like squeeze out of there and displace. So we're gonna go ahead and use some ATF, and then we'll put some assembly lube on the crankshaft side of the bearings. So we're just gonna go ahead and put a little bit on each one here. Gives it enough lubrication to be able to slide into place, but also be able to be displaced when it's ready. All right, we can grab our bearings and start setting those in. So we're just gonna line up the little bearing tang, get it in place. Just like so. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing to the girdle side of things, and then we can put some assembly lube on all of the bearings that we're not gonna check. So the only one I'm gonna leave with no oil is this center main, because we're gonna use some PLASTIGAUGE to measure our bearing clearance there, just to make sure that we're good to go. So we'll go ahead, get the girdle done, then we'll put some assembly lube on everything except for that one, and then we'll come in and start checking our clearances. So we're gonna use some of our VP assembly lube here, and just put a little bit on each bearing. The only one we're gonna leave dry is the one that we're gonna check with our PLASTIGAUGE to make sure we get a good clean reading. So we've got some oil on all of our bearings except for the center one. We're gonna do the same exact thing to the girdle, leaving the center one dry. So let's go ahead and grab our crankshaft. We can set it in here, throw some PLASTIGAUGE on, grab the girdle, and get that bolted down. Oh yeah. Slides way better than the crankshaft that came out of this thing, let me tell you what. Alright, I'm gonna grab the thrust washers and put those in there before I forget, because I will forget. And then we can grab the girdle and set it on here with our PLASTIGAUGE on this center journal. We go ahead and set our thrust washer in here. Alright, alright, we've got our thrust washers in there. Let's go ahead and grab our girdle and our PLASTIGAUGE, get that in place, and start bolting this thing down. So it's been a long time since I've used PLASTIGAUGE, but if I remember correctly, we're going to want to take a piece roughly the size of our bearing and have it going side to side, basically across the bearing. So we're going to go ahead and cut ourselves a piece, and then we will carefully set it dead center of this journal. We're using the green PLASTIGAUGE. I think it measures between, what did I say, 0.001 and 0.003. Alright, so I'm sure you guys can't see that on camera, but we've got the PLASTIGAUGE centered up in our bearing location where it's going to ride on the crankshaft. Now we'll grab our girdle, bring that over here, and set it down carefully right on top. And then the two long ones go in the center here. And like I said, we're just going to use a little bit of engine oil on the threads. You don't have to have them like dripping with oil, but just enough on the threads to coat them. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all these ran in. Alright, now that we've got everything in place, we grabbed our torque wrench. We're going to go ahead and torque this girdle down in sequence to spec, so that we can pull it back apart and check our plastic gauge. We're going to be going in this sequence right here that I've pulled up on my phone. I'll throw a better picture up on your guys' screen. But we're going to be going to 18 foot-pounds on the first pass. Then we'll go back through in sequence at 38 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and get this thing torqued down. Alright, now we can bump it up to 38. Now during this process, you want to try to make sure that the crankshaft does not turn. Now we can go through and back all of these off, pull the girdle off carefully, and check our plastic gauge. Now the fun part's going to be getting this off without messing up our plastic gauge. Alright, so it looks like we've got a little reading there. Let's go ahead and measure it. So we're just going to take our plastic gauge right on it. If you guys haven't used it, there's like a little sizing chart that'll tell you if the plastic gauge squished to that size, that's about what it equals. Obviously, it's more precise to do it with a micrometer and a bore gauge or something to measure the journal, but this is a good way to do it at home. We are very close to 0015, which is just about where we want to be for this engine. So I'm happy enough with that. We're going to go ahead, clean this up. We'll throw the girdle back on for good and torque this thing down. Alright, now we can grab some connecting rods and pistons, put the rings on, and start dropping them into the cylinders. So as you guys can see, we've got our piston rod assembly here. I already threw the rings on it. We're going to do the same thing for the bearings that we did on the main bearings. I'm just going to put a little bit of ATF on the journal side, and then we'll put the bearing in and put some assembly lube on the crankshaft side. So I'll go ahead and get that done here in a second. And then we're going to take this and dunk it down in this 30 weight oil. And we're not going to go like crazy. We're just going to probably go to somewhere right about here, just so that we have some oil in and behind those rings on the piston itself. So let's go ahead and get those two things done. Throw those in here. We're using the ACL bearings for the rods as well. Same thing with the cap. Set that to the side for a second. So we're going to go ahead and put some ARP lube on our ARP 2000 rod bolts. Put a generous amount on the threads here. Then I like to take a little bit and put it where the head of the bolt is going to contact the rod cap. Don't need to go too crazy. And then we're going to take our whole piston and we're actually going to dunk it right into this 30 weight oil that I have right here, just to make sure that we get some lubrication going on with the rings. So I'm just going to go ahead and dunk it just past the rings themselves, just like so. And then I'm going to take it out. I like to move the rings around a little bit. And when you put the rings on the pistons, you want to make sure that our ring gap are in different places. You don't want them all lining up. We're going to dab off any excess. And now we can head over to the block and set this thing in. So we are finally just about ready to drop our pistons and rods down into our new engine here. I'm going to use a little bit of ATF on the cylinder walls just so that there's something there. We don't want to have a bunch of thick synthetic oils in there. We want to just give it lubrication, but nothing crazy. So I'm just going to use some of this ATF on this rag, and we will go ahead and wipe down these cylinders real quick. We've wiped down the cylinders, and now we can grab our pistons and rods and start dropping them down in. So we've got our cheap little piston ring compressor here, and we've got our arrow facing our flywheel, the stamped or numbered side of the eagle rod with the bearing tang facing our exhaust side. Now I like to take I usually use my dead blow, but it's in my car. So we're gonna use this little rubber mallet. We're just gonna tap around our piston ring compressor here, make sure it's seated. Take the butt of it. Now that we've got the piston and rod down in the cylinder, we can turn the engine on its side, get the journal lined up with the rod, grab the rod end cap, get it slapped on, and start torquing it down. So these are the 7/16 headed bolts. So these are gonna get torqued down to 43 foot-pounds. Some of the older ones had a smaller head and they got torqued to a little bit less than that. So I'm gonna torque them down in 2 passes. You don't have to, but I'm going to. We're gonna go 21, and then we'll go up to 43. So I'm just going to keep alternating back and forth. Borderline overkill, but I just like to do it. Now I'm going to bump it up to 43 foot-pounds. Alright guys, so we've got our last rod torqued down. Now that we've got the new rods and pistons dropped down into our Y8 block, this thing is finally starting to come together, and this thing is looking really nice. So the next thing that we want to do is get our new oil pump bolted up. Now if you guys have been following along a little while back on the Honda playlist, I made a video on how to make a D16 Z6 oil pump work on a D16 Y8. So we've got our brand new ACL Z6 oil pump here, and of course we had to pick up a Z6 oil pickup tube. So now that we've got that all figured out, we can head over to the engine, get this thing bolted up, and we can torque it down. All right, so we're ready to install our oil pump. I went ahead, threw some oil on the seal, and then I used some Yama Bond, basically the same thing as Honda Bond, all around the oil pump itself. We've got everything cleaned off. I cleaned it all off with acetone first, but now we can go ahead and slide this pump on, and then we will torque it down. Now I'm going to throw the rest of our bolts in there, and we will start torquing this thing down to 98 inch-pounds. I like to put a little bit of oil, or in our case assembly oil, into the pump, turn it over a little bit before we seal this thing up. You don't have to do this, but I like to, so I'm going to. Now we know that the oil pump has at least some oil in it. Now we can grab our pickup tube and our gasket and get that bolted down. Go ahead and grab our pickup tube and get that bolted down. As you guys can see, everything is lining up just how it should. So I'm going to go ahead, put a little bit of Loctite on all of these, and we'll get them torqued down to 96 inch-pounds. Since we had a Y8 pump to start with, the studs are actually a lot smaller than these Z6 ones. So we just went to the local hardware store and picked up some stainless steel ones. I put some Loctite on there just to be safe, and I'm going to do the same thing with the 2 bolts on that side of the screen. So we're going to torque all 4 of these down to 96 inch-pounds. Now that we've got our new ACL oil pump installed, we can turn our attention to the cylinder head. This is the same cylinder head that we worked a little while back on the Honda playlist. We did go through and hand port the intake and the exhaust side, and this thing came out super sweet. I'll throw some pictures up on your guys' screen just in case you missed that video. But while we were in there, we decided to lap the valves, throw a set of Crowder valve springs in there, and then we also picked up a comp cam, the 59300. Now this camshaft is designed for a Z6 head, but you can use it in a Y8. You just need an adjustable cam gear, which we have, so we're going to be using that, and we will degree our cam in once this thing is on the engine. We are going to be using a set of ARP head studs and a COMETIC head gasket. So let's get this thing all cleaned up, prepped for our head studs. We'll get it set on the block and get ready to start degreeing in our new camshaft. Now that we've got both the block and the head mating surfaces cleaned up with acetone, I went ahead and put the dowel pins in, one there and one right here. And then I grabbed our head gasket. We're going to be using a COMETIC. This is a 30 thousandths MLS head gasket. I'll link this one with the part number in the description below. But we can go ahead and pop this thing out. And you can see on the gasket right there, it is stamped up. So we're going to go ahead and slap that guy on, just like so. Now we can grab our cylinder head and carefully set it on here. Just like so. We made sure to clean off the little pedestals where the washers for our new ARP head studs are gonna sit. So now we can start running all of our studs down into the block. We're just gonna do them all finger tight. You don't need to tighten them down or anything. I am gonna use this little Allen wrench just because they're easier to reach. But we're gonna run them in, and we're not gonna apply any torque to them, literally. We're literally just gonna run them in until they stop and move on to the next one. Now that we've got all the new studs ran in finger tight, we can take the washers that came with the ARP studs and set them on there with no oil or anything like that. We want them on there dry right now. So we'll go through and get those all on. Now we can apply some of the ARP Ultra Torque lube to the threads that are still sticking out and to the bottom side of the nuts that we're going to be using. I like to use one of these little tiny screwdrivers because my fat fingers don't fit down in there. So we'll go ahead and do this to all the studs and then to the nut, and then we can start torquing this thing down. Now that we've got everything started, we can go through and torque it down. With the ARP studs that we're using, they want us to do 15 foot-pounds, then 30, and then 60. So we're gonna go ahead and run through it real quick in the sequence that Honda recommends, and I will put a picture of that up on your guys' screen right now. Now we can jump up to 30 foot-pounds and do the same thing once again, and then 60. So now we've done 15 foot-pounds and 30 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna step up to 60 foot-pounds. Alright, so we've got this thing torqued down and we are ready to start degreeing our camshaft. Now that we've got our ported cylinder head on and torqued down, I want to degree in our camshaft because the cam we're using is the COMPCAMS 59300, which is designed for the Z6, and we're obviously using it in a Y8. So I've got some new parts over here and some tools that we're going to be using to get this thing degreed in. So we've got a new Gates water pump, a new Gates RPM blue timing belt, an NSK timing belt tensioner, and I wanted to give the VMS Racing adjustable cam gear a shot. It's actually a pretty cool looking little piece, and I think it's going to work out fine for what we need to do. We'll make sure that we get these bolts torqued down to what they recommend once we have everything dialed in. Now, as far as degreeing the cam goes, we're going to be using the COMPCAMS centerline method. Personally, I've never degreed in a cam before. With LS's, I always just go dot to dot. So this will be a new thing for me as well, but we'll get this thing figured out. We have their instructions right there that came came with the camshaft. We have a degree wheel also from COMETIC, and then I picked up a cheap little piston stop off of Amazon. And then for our dial indicators, I've got an old one I've had for years, and then we picked up a new one over at Harbor Freight. I think we were in this whole unit for like 35 bucks. So we should be good to go, and it should be fine for what we need to do. So let's get some of these new parts installed, and then we can start figuring out how to degree in our camshaft. We've got our new water pump here, and I went ahead and cleaned this surface with acetone. Go ahead and get this set on here carefully with our new O-ring in there. Start getting some bolts started. Now we're going to torque the water pump bolts to 104 inch-pounds. Now we can get our timing belt tensioner and bolt that on. As you guys can see, I've got the factory cam gear on here right now, and it is marked up right there. I'm going to use an oil filter wrench just because it's the only thing I have that fits over this right now. And we can use this to help us get it in the location where it's supposed to be. So we want the up mark to be straight up and down vertical, basically. So we're going to just try to carefully turn this and get it as close to straight up and down as we can. Alright, so we've got that close enough for me. I think it's pretty good. So now we can take this cam gear off, put our new cam gear on with our Woodruff key that comes with the cam gear. Then we can grab our timing belt and start getting that in place. Gonna put our upper timing cover on here before we put our cam gear in. Now we've got our new cam gear and our Woodruff key. Don't forget the Woodruff key. Alright, we can throw our bolt in there. We're going to wait to torque this bolt down. The cam gear can't move because of the key, so we're going to wait to torque that down until the belt's on so it can hold the pulley. So let's go ahead, grab our belt, start getting that set on there, and then we can start figuring out how to degree this thing. Now we can install our new Gates Blue RPM belt. That is a tight fit. Alright, now that we've got our belt on, we can start making sure we've got everything where it needs to be. We can grab our degree wheel and start getting this thing degreed. I can't remember if I torqued down the timing belt tensioner bolt, so we're going to go ahead and hit it again real quick. 33 foot-pounds is the torque for this bolt. And I must have already torqued it down. So we're good to go. Let's move on to the next thing. Now that we have our timing belt on there, I forgot to mention one thing. Before we put the belt on, we have our cam sprocket facing straight up, but there's also a mark down here on the crank pulley. There's a line right there, and then right behind it, we have our arrow lined up with it. So you want to have the crank pulley lined up with that. That's our top dead center mark. Our cam pulley is straight up and down, and now that we have both of those and the belt on, we can grab our degree wheel, make a little pointer, and get those both mounted up to the engine. So I wanted to interrupt the video real quick because when I sat down to start editing this video, I realized just how long it was gonna be. So what I've decided to do is separate it into two pieces. We're gonna have the full engine assembly in this video, and then we're gonna do a shorter separate video just on degreeing in the camshaft, because if I put them both together, this would have been well over an hour-long video. So I've just decided to separate them off. So if that's the information you guys are looking for, make sure to stay tuned because I will walk you through exactly how we degreed in this camshaft in an upcoming video. So let's get back to work reassembling the new engine for the super cheap Turbo Civic. So now that we've got the new camshaft all degreed in and this thing is good to go, I went ahead and flipped the engine over, took the degree wheel off, and got a few little things done. I did put a new rear main seal in the rear main seal housing and then applied RTV to the mating surface just like we did with the oil pump on the front and got that thing bolted up. I'll throw the torque numbers up on your guys' screen because I don't remember them off the top of my head, but we've got that all torqued down. down. Now the next thing that we're gonna do is start getting ready to put our new D16 Z6 oil pan on. As you guys know, this is a Y8 block with a Z6 pan, so we're gonna test fit with the gasket in the pan, make sure it's good to go before we start applying RTV onto our new gasket. So let's go ahead, get set up. We'll grab our new pan and start getting it bolted on. As you guys can see, we've got the engine laid over on its side. We're gonna put our coolant crossover tube back in here and our thermostat housing. Now we're gonna put a new thermostat in here while we're at it. We've got everything all painted up and looking nice. And then all of the bolts for the thermostat housing are gonna get torqued to 104 inch-pounds. So let's get this thing thrown together. Alright, we've got the thermostat housing on and our coolant crossover tube bolted up, torqued down. Now we can flip this thing over and keep it moving. While we're here, I'm going to throw on our VTEC solenoid. Of course, the one piece that I didn't paint or clean up, but we'll go ahead and throw it on anyways. I threw a little bit of oil on the O-ring seal, and we will get this thing bolted up. We're also going to be torquing this down to 104 inch-pounds. Alright, VTEC solenoid is on and torqued down. We're going to torque this coolant outlet to 86 inch-pounds. We're finally ready to put the oil pan on this thing and get this thing sealed up. So if you guys seen a little while back when we were first doing the oil system on this engine, we decided to go with the Z6 oil pump, but by doing so, we had to modify a few things. So we're gonna be using this Z6 oil pan, and we had to make a new hole over here for our dipstick to line up with, since we lost our dipstick location by going from the Y8 to the Z6 oil pump, which also meant that we had to use a D17 valve cover so that we would actually have a dipstick. So we've got all of those modifications done, and we're gonna be using a Z6 oil pan gasket along with our Z6 oil pan, and then we're gonna be using some of this CRC blue RTV to help seal this thing up along with the Felpro gasket. So let's lay some silicone down and then we'll get this thing installed. So we'll go ahead and start laying some of this down. I'm gonna go pretty decently heavy, especially in the corners here, just because I don't wanna have to worry about any issues. Then we'll roll a nice bead up along here. Now I'm going to do the same thing back here at the rear main seal housing. I'm going to lay it kind of thick back here because the Z6 pan gasket doesn't fit as good as it does up in the front. I'm going to grab the pan, we'll get that set on here as well. Go ahead and get all of these on. We grabbed our 1/4 inch drive torque wrench and we're going to torque these down to 104 inch-pounds. So again, we're going to start in the center. Alright, we've got the oil pan all torqued down, made a nice mess with our pretty blue silicone. We're going to let that stuff cure, we'll flip this thing back over, and we can move on to the next thing. Now that we've got everything else installed, we can go ahead and throw our balancer or crankshaft pulley on. As you guys will see, there is a keyway right here. I've got it in my hands. We're going to set that in like that, and then we can slide this thing on. The way I have it, it's probably going to be easier to put it in the crankshaft itself, just like so. Just like so. Now we can throw the bolt in there and get this thing torqued down. So there you have it, guys. We've got the new engine for the super cheap turbo Civic build all reassembled and ready to go. Now, most of the parts that went into today's build, I either sourced on Facebook Marketplace brand new in the box, or I got them for a crazy good deal. The only thing I actually bought new from a vendor was the valve springs, the head gasket, and any other seals or gaskets, things like that. But the rods, the pistons, the camshaft, the crankshaft, pretty much all the hard parts I found for a really good price on Facebook. So we got this thing fully built and reassembled for a really good price. Not sure the exact dollar amount, but it's pretty low. So I'm super stoked with how this thing came together. We got quite a bit of time into it, hand porting it and everything else, but it was well worth it for the bottom line of how much we're in this thing and how much fun I think we're gonna have with it. I'm really curious to see what kind of power this thing can make and to get our new max speeding rods, billet wheel, ball bearing turbo on there and see how this thing works out. So as always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and check us out on all of our other social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok, and Bought to Build Official on Instagram. And we will catch you on the next one.